It's Sunday, June 14th, 2026, and the top of the news agenda has the feel of a pressure test. The World Cup is underway, and already it has delivered the full tournament package: joy, shocks, tactical questions, traffic jams, and politics just outside the frame. New York is celebrating something it has waited more than half a century to see: a Knicks championship. SpaceX has entered the public markets at a scale almost too large to process, turning a rocket company into a test case for private power, public dependence, and investor appetite. And in Washington, regulators and courts are moving in very different directions, approving a giant Hollywood merger, opening the door to a new sunscreen ingredient, and drawing limits around who gets to rename public institutions or rewrite public history. So today, we're connecting the dots across sports, markets, politics, health, and culture, because the real story is not just what happened. It's what these events reveal about scale, power, and pressure. Let's start with the World Cup. Brazil opened its campaign with a 1-1 draw against Morocco. And for a country that measures World Cups in titles rather than participation, a draw can feel like an alarm bell. Morocco went ahead early through Ismail Saibari, and Brazil needed Vinicius Jr. to pull it level. On paper, Brazil avoided a loss. In practice, the result raised familiar questions. Is the attack fluid enough? Is the team carrying the psychological weight of expectation? And can Carlo Ancelotti translate club-level authority into tournament control under national team pressure? That last part matters. In a World Cup, especially an expanded one, the best team on paper does not always get time to settle. The variables multiply: travel, heat, security, stadium conditions, crowd energy, and the emotional volatility of knockout-style attention, even in group play. Morocco's performance mattered because it showed how quickly a favorite can be made uncomfortable. This was not a fluke built only on a single counterattack. It was a reminder that modern tournament football rewards organization, confidence, and the ability to make powerful teams feel rushed. Australia delivered that same lesson in a different form, beating Turkey 2-0 in Vancouver. The goals from Nestori Irankunda and Connor Metcalfe gave Australia more than 3 points. They gave the Socceroos a template: stay compact, stay disciplined, frustrate possession, and turn efficiency into pressure. Scotland, meanwhile, returned to the Men's World Cup after 28 years, and marked the moment with a 1-0 win over Haiti in Foxborough. John McGinn's deflected strike was enough, and for Scotland's travelling support, the result carried the weight of a generation. Qatar also made history by earning its first World Cup point, equalizing late against Switzerland. Switzerland had controlled much of the match, and led through a Breel Embolo penalty. But Boualem Kouki's stoppage-time header changed the story. What looked routine became one of the tournament's early surprises. And the United States opened with a 4-1 win over Paraguay at SoFi Stadium, a result that mattered on the field and in the television numbers. Reports of nearly 25 million U.S. viewers across English and Spanish-language broadcasts point to one of the central questions of this World Cup. Can the tournament move from global spectacle to mainstream American habit? That question is especially important because the World Cup is not arriving in a quiet sports landscape. It is landing in the middle of everything. In the New York area, the Brazil-Morocco match at MetLife Stadium, branded by FIFA as New York-New Jersey Stadium, collided with Knicks celebrations, Mets traffic, concerts, security closures, and the everyday density of one of the world's busiest metropolitan areas. Penn Station was squeezed, roads were jammed, parking was expensive, and the whole scene became a reminder that hosting mega events is not just about stadium capacity. It is about transit systems, crowd control, policing, pricing, and whether a city can absorb multiple civic events at once. Boston faced a different version of the same test. Haiti against Scotland brought celebration and identity into the streets, including Haitian fan energy in the city before kickoff. But Foxborough is not downtown Boston. Getting tens of thousands of people to and from a stadium outside the urban core is always a logistical challenge, and the World Cup simply magnifies it. In the Bay Area, Qatar against Switzerland reportedly had visible empty seats at Levi's Stadium. That matters because World Cups are often assumed to be automatic sellouts. But price, politics, geography, and local enthusiasm still matter. Even the biggest sports property in the world has to meet fans where they are. There is also a diplomatic shadow over the tournament. Iran's preparations have been complicated by visa delays, travel restrictions, and security concerns, with the team training in Tijuana ahead of a scheduled match in Los Angeles against New Zealand. FIFA prefers the message that football rises above politics. But tournaments do not happen in a vacuum. Borders, visas, conflict, and policing all travel with the teams. Now shift from global football to one city's eruption. The New York Knicks are NBA champions for the first time since 1973. They beat the San Antonio Spurs 94-90 in Game 5, taking the series 4-1. Jalen Brunson scored 45 points, including 13 straight in the fourth quarter, and was named Finals MVP. Factually, that is the result, but the interpretation is larger. This was not just a basketball title. It was the end of a 53-year civic drought. The Knicks have long been more than a team in New York. They have been a public mood board. Hope, frustration, celebrity, dysfunction, false dawns, and eternal belief. So when Brunson carried them through the final moments, it instantly rewrote the city's sports hierarchy. For one weekend, the World Cup may have been global, but the Knicks were local, immediate, and overwhelming. And that matters for public management too. The championship celebration is not just emotional. It creates crowds, traffic, police deployment, spontaneous gatherings, and pressure on transit systems. Put that on top of a World Cup match and other major events, and sports success becomes a city planning challenge within hours. Elsewhere in sports, Denny Hamlin took the Pocono pole with a 51.948-second lap. His 51st career Cup Series pole and 6th at that track. In Omaha, North Carolina beat Ole Miss 6-2 in the Men's College World Series, while Georgia beat Texas 7-1 behind a complete Game 15 strikeout performance from Joey Volchko. And the San Francisco 49ers announced the death of former All-Pro linebacker Aldon Smith at 36, a moment that brings both grief and reflection on a career marked by extraordinary talent and serious off-field struggles. Now to markets, and to one of the biggest financial stories of the year. SpaceX priced its IPO at $135 a share, raising roughly $75 billion and valuing the company at about $1.77 trillion at the offering price. After trading began, the stock reportedly closed its first day sharply higher, pushing the market capitalization above $2 trillion. Those are extraordinary numbers. But the market story is only one layer. The bigger story is concentration of power. SpaceX sits at the intersection of launch systems, satellite internet, national security, commercial spaceflight, and the future of orbital infrastructure. Elon Musk's broader empire also touches electric vehicles, social media, artificial intelligence, brain-computer interfaces, and tunneling. Several of those businesses interact directly with public contracts, regulation, subsidies, or government demand. Here is the fact. SpaceX is now a public market giant. Here is the interpretation. Investors are not just buying a space company. They are buying exposure to a privately built infrastructure layer that governments increasingly depend on. And here is the policy question. What happens when public priorities rely on private systems controlled by a small number of people? Supporters argue that Musk-led companies have moved stagnant industries faster than governments or incumbents ever could. That is a serious argument. SpaceX transformed launch economics. Tesla reshaped the auto industry. Starlink changed the conversation about satellite broadband. Critics argue that democratic oversight has not kept pace with dependence. That is also a serious argument. When private infrastructure becomes essential infrastructure, questions about pricing, access, security, labor, safety, and political influence become public questions. For investors, the forward-looking issue is valuation discipline. SpaceX may be one of the most consequential companies in the world, but even consequential companies can be mispriced. A $1 trillion-plus valuation demands enormous future cash flows, execution, and regulatory stability. That does not mean the stock cannot work. It means the burden of proof is high. In media, the Justice Department cleared Paramount Skydance's proposed $110 billion acquisition of Warner Bros. Discovery, concluding that the deal was not likely to harm competition or consumers across streaming, linear television, or theatrical film distribution. That removes a major regulatory hurdle for one of the biggest Hollywood consolidations in years. The interpretation is that Washington is giving legacy media companies room to bulk up against technology platforms. Streaming economics have been brutal. Cable television is shrinking. Theatrical film is more hit-driven than ever. And the companies that once dominated entertainment now compete against tech giants with deeper balance sheets, larger user bases, and more diversified revenue. But consolidation has trade-offs. Fewer independent decision-makers can mean fewer buyers for creative work. It can mean layoffs, reduced bargaining power for labor, and fewer paths for riskier projects. Scale may be rational for shareholders, but it can narrow the ecosystem. Courts, meanwhile, are drawing lines around public memory. Workers removed Donald Trump's name from the Kennedy Center facade after a federal judge ruled the institution could not be renamed without congressional approval. Separately, a federal judge ordered the Trump administration to restore national park signs and historical or scientific materials altered or removed under a March 2025 executive order. These may sound like cultural disputes, and they are, but they are also institutional disputes. Names on public buildings, exhibit text in parks, and scientific materials in national spaces are not neutral details. They are official versions of memory. The legal question is who has authority. The civic question is who gets to tell the story. On the global stage, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney used meetings ahead of the G7 to argue that middle-power countries should not simply compete for favor with the United States. That reflects a broader Canadian effort to align more closely with Europe, as the rules-based order faces pressure from great power rivalry. The diplomacy also tests familiar tensions between France and the United States, including trade, security, and climate. In health and science, the FDA added bemotrizinol, also known as BEMD, to the list of permitted over-the-counter sunscreen active ingredients. It is the first new U.S. sunscreen filter approval since the late 1990s. For consumers, this could eventually mean broader-spectrum sunscreen options closer to those available in Europe and parts of Asia. For regulators, it is a sign that a slow-moving approval system can still change. But availability will not be instant everywhere. Manufacturers still have to formulate, produce, market, and distribute products. NASA also named Randy Bresnik, Luca Parmitano, Andre Douglas, and Frank Rubio as the Artemis 3 crew for a 2027 low Earth orbit mission designed to test Orion's rendezvous and docking operations with human landing system prototypes. The goal is to help pave the way for a planned Artemis 4 crewed lunar landing in 2028. And in agriculture, federal officials confirmed New World screwworm detections in Texas and New Mexico, raising alarms across the livestock sector. The response includes surveillance and sterile fly releases, a method used in earlier eradication efforts. This is a livestock issue first, but it is also an inflation and food supply issue if it spreads. Animal health can become an economic story quickly. In culture, the Obama Presidential Center is set to open to the public on June 19th in Chicago's Jackson Park. The art world is marking the death of David Hockney at 88, one of the most influential British artists of the post-war era. Jean Shalit, the longtime Today Show film critic, has died at 100. WABC anchor Bill Ritter announced his retirement after being diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's disease, closing a long chapter in local television. And in Sydney, a 35-year-old woman was critically injured in a shark attack at Coogee Beach. A paddleboarder helped bring her toward shore after witnesses shouted warnings. The story is frightening because it happened at a popular urban beach, but it is also a story about response, the seconds in which bystanders become rescuers. So what should we watch next? First, the World Cup. Brazil's next match will tell us whether the Morocco draw was opening week noise or evidence of deeper problems. Australia has a chance to turn one upset into group stage leverage. Scotland now has belief. And U.S. organizers will be watching not just the games, but the trains, roads, stadium entries, and television numbers. Second, New York. The Knicks title celebration is a civic event now. The question is whether the city can manage overlapping sports and entertainment crowds without the joy curdling into disorder. Third, SpaceX. The first trading days will test whether demand is durable or whether the IPO pop becomes a valuation debate. Investors should separate admiration for the company from discipline about price. Both can be true at the same time. Fourth, Washington. The Paramount-Warner decision suggests a more permissive approach to media consolidation, while the Kennedy Center and National Park rulings show courts willing to check executive or institutional overreach in cultural spaces. And finally, public systems. Sunscreen regulation, Artemis planning, and screwworm response all show the same thing from different angles. Government can move slowly, but when it moves, the consequences can touch daily life, national ambition, and entire industries. The bottom line is this: today's biggest stories are all about scale. A World Cup tests cities. A championship tests a fan base's capacity for joy. A trillion-dollar IPO tests markets and oversight. A media merger tests antitrust philosophy. A court ruling tests institutional boundaries. A sunscreen decision tests regulatory modernization. Facts tell us what happened. Interpretation tells us why it matters. The future will tell us whether these were one-day headlines or early signs of larger shifts. As always, this is for informational purposes only. It is not financial, investment, medical, legal, or safety advice. For decisions involving money, health, law, or personal safety, consult qualified professionals. For now, the lesson of the day is simple. When sports, money, politics, and public systems all hit stress points at once, the real story is not chaos. It is capacity. Who has it, who lacks it, and who gets to decide what happens next.